You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello and welcome to another Business Wealth Impact. Today we have Jason English as a wonderful guest. Jason's story is the epitome of hard work accompanied by the power of choice and determination. From fighting crime on the streets of South Africa in 1996 as a police officer to earning his mechanical engineering degree in 1999, Jason embarked on his entrepreneurial journey in 2012. This journey shaped Jason into a great leader, entrepreneur, and visionary. Jason also earned his engineering qualification while serving in the South African police force as a paramedic. He's also completed his MBA in various short programs with Harvard, Stanford, and Singularity University. Now, Jason runs a multi-million-dollar investment firm called CG Tech. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Sean, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm super excited because I wanted to hear about your journey from police officer in South Africa to running. Your company makes about $200 million a year, super successful. We want to delve into some of your secrets and what got you there. So what got you started on the entrepreneurial journey? You were working in the police force, and what was the birth of that?
Yeah, so it's while I was busy studying and working in the police force, it was kind of a bit of a passion, I guess. And the police force for me was something that you kind of grew up in as a child. Everyone wanted to play, the old day cops and robbers. And then I entered actually into the corporate world. So I worked for a large international oil and gas firm from 1999 until 2012. And that was sort of a 14-and-a-half-year corporate career. But many lessons from the police service actually have guided and helped me through the rest of the entrepreneurial journey, which I'm sure we'll get into in the conversation. So yes, but in 2012, I'd been traveling the world, and I was that specific year that I resigned and started my own business. I had spent one day at home in 6 months. It was actually the day that I conceived my child with my wife, my first child. And I know that because it was the only day I was home.
So, pretty sure.
So I guess what had happened was at the time she was pretty far pregnant. I was in Australia and I was just sitting looking out onto the Brisbane River, and I said, what the hell am I doing? And just without a job, I kind of quit, and I got on a plane and I flew back to South Africa where I could be with my wife and my child to be.
Wow.
And that's how the entrepreneurial journey started.
Okay, so you got out of that and now you're at home, wife heavily pregnant. And, how does somebody get from beginning to 14 years only, 2012, right, to have a company that is so successful? How did you do that?
So the funny thing is that actually when I started out on the journey, I had an ambition to probably do in the region of $400,000 a year. And I was going to play golf 3 days a week. And I was just going to live a very quiet life. But I guess some people either have an innate entrepreneurial mindset and growth mindset that just carries you in different directions. And each challenge that gets presented, you want to take on. And so that, that sort of fueled the rest is history journey.
Okay, so how did you start? Because we know you didn't go from 0 to 200 million. So you started off, you said, I'm going to make 400,000 and play golf, but then something changed along the way. What changed?
Yeah, so what ended up happening was I figured that starting a new business was really tough. And so one of the angles that I really wanted to do was I knew our customer base was really solid and I had a good relationship with customers. And so what I wanted to do was leverage those relationships, but I needed to have access into those customers. So I actually ended up acquiring a small privately held business, and that had a vendor number with a big client in oil and gas. And that really gave me the springboard to be able to grow from there. So once I had that accessibility, I could then leverage my relationships and my knowledge of the industry and the respect that I had in the industry to be able to fuel the growth. And so it just sort of went from, strength to strength. And it started out with an office of 3 people and, in a sort of double garage size office. And we started out, we got our first contract, and before you know it, you get your second contract and your third contract, and then you're sort of fighting the pains of growth, and running out of money and all those other challenges that come with fast growing businesses. And so it was kind of like a bit of a tech company on steroids, to be quite honest. And within 3 years, we were almost at 1,000 people in the business. So it was quite radical growth. But yeah, that's sort of how the journey started, and the growth trajectory began.
Wow, fascinating. So what does your company do, by the way?
So CG Tech is actually an investment firm by the core, but we're different in the sense that we own and we operate. So we now today as a group, we have multiple companies. We have around 8 in the group, spanning South Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and then Asia. And ultimately, at the core of it, we're really engineering and construction focused businesses, but with a technical services focal point. So we don't do traditional brick and mortar construction, but we more do design, engineering, then construction and builds of a lot of metal, steel, piping across multiple industries. We do everything from scaffolding to big event infrastructure to film studios. But it sounds really far stretched and far apart from each other, but actually at the core of it, it's really just engineering and construction. And then we have a technology play, which is really where our USP kicks in. And that's hence the reason why we called ourselves CG Tech. So even though we own and operate, what we felt was that we have a technology laboratory, we call it our incubator. We design and develop technology that can enable our underlying core businesses to succeed in a very competitive landscape. And what we do is once we find technologies that actually we've tested on our own verticals and realize that there's good value and success, we can then externalize those as a product. So our skunkworks sort of tech arm really is an internal development, but once it reaches scalable success, then we move that out and we deploy it to third party.
So where does the investment come in? Because it's really, you're producing stuff and you're building and constructing, and then you've got the tech. So where does the you said it's really an investment firm.
Yeah, so at the core of it, I mean, ultimately what we do is we're either investing in, a new technology or a new startup. We're investing in some existing companies because along the way we have acquired companies as well into the group. So we're acquiring companies where we feel like we can bring a growth perspective to that business, especially deploying technology at the core of it, as well as then strategic management and oversight. But yeah, that's why I say we're not really an investment firm, but we are an investment firm in the sense that we have a group of shareholders. We deploy our capital into either startups or any growth business, and then we will use our operational skills to actually go in and help run those companies and to deploy some of those innovative processes to ultimately make the business, let's call it, more valuable.
Okay, now I understand. You have a group of investors and you're investing all that money into, okay, now I'm getting it. It's a lot of things, your company. Okay, now we were chatting before, and you said a lot of luck came into your success. Now, it's interesting. Most people say that, and other people say, well, luck is just, preparedness with blah, blah, blah. I can't remember what they say. But what was the luck that you had?
I think along the way, you have loads of different pockets of luck. Actually, very early on in my career, it was I think it was the first or second year that we were in the running. We were growing so fast that I ended up running out of money. And it really happened. I planned the cash flow, and then I had one client that just delayed a payment. And it was my first real lesson in cash flow management, right? So I never faced that working in a corporate environment where, money is always kind of available. And I actually went to one of my friends and I said to him, I need to borrow money because I can't pay. And it was a lot of luck because at that stage he said yes. I mean, he could have said no and the business would have closed down.
Oh, wow.
But then I also think you make a lot of strategic moves that ultimately, have luck. So, it's the people you hire. There's calculated luck. It's the choices you take, the chances you take. Some of them are luck. And yeah, I mean, business in itself it's a combination of calculated risks, but you do need a bit of sideline help from the gods to be able to steer you in the right direction or make sure that you get through these tough battles.
So there are things that happen that if you hadn't had that happen, it would have closed your business down. You would have had to do something else or start all over again.
100%. And in fact, I mean, I have an incredible story. Literally 2 weeks or about maybe a month into my full entrepreneurial journey, I'd landed my first contract with my client. And my ex-company there was somebody inside that had gone to their ethics committee to try and actually shut me down so I didn't get momentum. I guess they knew that there was a bit of a threat and a risk to the entire, to their business. And it was 3 months of hell for me. I mean, I lost my hair. I got a disease called alopecia.
Oh.
It was an extremely stressful period for me, and I could have given up,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I knew that I knew where I stood. I knew my values.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I had good respect for the clients, and the clients had good respect for me, and that I just needed to prove the innocence, and that I was being sort of framed in the process. And ultimately, we ended up doing that. Bought in auditors, did forensic stuff, got the clients' forensic teams in, and ultimately, I was cleared. And so again, like that was luck, because even the people on the client side were willing to go through that journey with me.
Right.
They could have just said, "Look, there's an accusation. You're gone." And so I do say that there's a lot of luck that comes into these things, but again, a bit of you make your own luck.
Right. I would say so, because what you just told me was something that people would say is not lucky, because you lost your hair and got alopecia and was stressed. So it's the way you just framed that shows me why you're successful, because you actually just focused on the positive part, that your client stuck with you and all this other bad stuff happened, but that was just an aside for you.
Yeah. And they say, like, I have the saying, leadership is the ability to hide your panic from others, right? And
Exactly.
I guess again,
Yes.
it's when you're leading and you've got troops coming in behind you, like you need to instill a vote of confidence to them. They need to feel like you know what you're doing, that you're not worried, because if you start running, I mean, they start panicking, right? What's my job? What's my career? Where's the company going? And so, yeah, so having that positive mindset, that continuous bullish approach to the business, being confident in the things that you're doing, really instills confidence in the team behind you. And I think ultimately helps them understand the vision, your goals, and just set those clearly, then people can follow them.
Right. Okay. So what we're getting from this is, be careful with your cash flow, folks, and don't assume people are going to pay on time, because they often don't. That's the first lesson. I guess you were just so trusting, you just thought everybody was going to have their payments in on time.
Exactly. And I mean, I've learned that it was a great lesson to learn early on, when it was manageable, that I could go to a friend to borrow money. Because obviously, if it was in today's world, it would be a lot more challenging. So the lessons that we've learned from that, look, the client was a great client, but we have had subsequent, issues with clients not paying us beyond that across the globe. And the one thing that it's made me realize is also, when you're onboarding a client, it's the same as onboarding an employee, right? You need to make sure that you understand who their client is, what are their values, what are their protocols, what are their systems, and actually, are they a client that you want to work with? Like, are they aligned with you in terms of their values? And the simple example I use is, if I'm a customer and I have a supplier, and that supplier needs money, and my values are, I'm going to just make my extra margin by screwing my supply chain. As a supplier, why would you want to work with me?
Right.
So it's all about making sure that you're aligned, and I find that those are the best relationships that we have, both up and down the value chain. And there's certainly the times where, when there's a challenge or when there's a fire to be fought, everybody climbs in and sticks together, because you're all seen as one team, rather than a them and us environment.
That is so important. I think people are talking about that more, about the values of who you work with. In the old days, it was just, you just did a deal and you didn't really look into that. And I think it's a good thing that people are understanding that it is a very important point. It's a very important point to see if somebody has scruples and has ethics and morals, or why would you work? Because if they're not going to be, ethical with other people, in the end, they won't be ethical with you either. You're not going to be the exception. You just won't be.
Yeah, and look, and the reality is, people also change, right? And businesses change, and they have to, because when you're a small mom and pops type of business, you can operate in a certain way. When you're a big international conglomerate, it's more complex. You need more stringent systems, etc., etc. But the best analogy that I always use with my teams and people that I talk to is marriage. If you think about marriage in the context, when you first start dating, you start dating somebody because you find them attractive, you've got similar values, there's a keen interest in the same hobbies, etc. And as you sort of evolve in your relationship, sometimes those drift apart, not because it was intentional, but people's value systems change. Somebody, sees money as a core driver of their success and wants to chase that, and somebody else sees family time as a driver of their success, and so you end up parting. So the message that I always say to CEOs as well as my employees is, don't stick around in a company just because it's paying your bills. Make sure that the journey of you being part of that business is because it aligns to your core values and it remains there. And if it changes, it's okay to get divorced. It's okay to walk around. Don't stay in toxic relationships, whether it's personal or business, right? So, and even as an employer, don't hold on to somebody in your company, even though they're really good, if they're toxic, because ultimately their values are misaligned and it's going to affect the outcome of your business.
That is a very important point. I have coached a lot of people that had enormous problems letting go of team members, employees, even though they knew they were toxic because it was a habit. They were scared that they wouldn't find somebody that could do the job as well. And I find it's like one of the hardest things to do is to let go of employees that people have become attached to for whatever reason. It could just be Stockholm syndrome that they're attached to them. So tell us a story about that. Have you had a situation where it has been hard for you to let go?
Absolutely. In multiple of our businesses, in fact, I mean, when I came into the business, one of the founding partners, we had some challenges. They were different in the value chain. They were different in their vision for the organization. And ultimately, we had to part ways as partners, and that was okay. I've had others where, we've had executives, again, that have had they've been stuck in a way for 15, 20 years inside an organization. And that's okay. It's their way of doing things. It's just not the way that I wanted things to be done. And therefore we had to part ways. And I let go of 2 employees actually when I came into our Middle East business that we acquired. We parted ways with 2 people that had been there for more than 15 years that were both heads of divisions and departments. And that was a big, bold step, and everyone said, you're crazy to do it. But I realized at the time that, if we want to go forward and we want to change the direction of the company, you have to have people that are willing to walk along with your vision and your value system.
Right.
And sometimes that's just not possible. And then you need to separate. And sometimes it is possible. And in which case, you continue the journey. But these things change, and it's a constantly moving thing. It's not like you create a set of values for a company and they never change, or you create a vision for a company and they never change.
Right. No, and also when you are letting go, and it is letting go in a good way, when you're letting go of a person that is working with you and they're not aligned, you're doing them a favor, because then they can grow in the way they want to, or not grow, or find a company that works the way they want to, because ultimately everybody is losing in that, because it's like an unwilling relationship where, okay, we're going to stay, but we're both not happy. Right.
Well, the most productive and effective employees are those that are happy employees, right?
Exactly.
So why would you want to be in that toxic environment, even if it's not toxic, but it's toxic from your value perspective?
Right.
So change it.
Exactly. Everybody wins. But the problem is people don't like change sometimes, so they'll stay in from both parties, both sides. But when it's like, you know what, in the end, they will thank you, because then they can just go for what they want. And ultimately, we should be helping every individual to go for what they really want. It's like, what do you really want? And, they probably wouldn't have liked working for your company. Also, from a financial point of view, they've done studies on this. An employee that is not working efficiently or in the way that you would like them to, usually, depending on the level, can lose $1 million or more for that company, or if they're pivotal, many millions a year just by staying in the company. So it's not to your benefit. Okay, so now what are some disasters you've had, apart from almost losing the company by not being able to, you figured that one out. What are some huge disasters and some lessons you've learned?
Jean, I would say that I'm fairly fortunate in that I don't think we've really had any major disasters within the group. And again, it's maybe a bit of luck, but probably also managed outcomes. I would say that there's been some challenges. I think cash flow is always a challenge. In a growing business, it's really tough, especially for a capex heavy business. So, we have services businesses and then also capex heavy businesses. And what we find is that there's so many opportunities that come, but they require equipment, machinery, etc., that costs a lot of money. And then it becomes a choice of capital allocation. And that those choices can really affect you, because some of them are strategic blocks against defense mechanisms, against new competitors, or against your competitors taking on an opportunity. Some of them are around, just moving into new innovative spaces that potentially haven't been untested. So it's all these dynamics that kick in, but the reality is, cash is king. As they say, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. And I would say that that's probably the biggest challenge that we have faced throughout our journey is when you've got a consistently growing portfolio of businesses, deploying that capital in the right locations is always going to upset somebody that doesn't get the capital. And then they think, why are you not supporting my business, but you're supporting another business or division or department? And at the same time, for us, it's that stress of, are we making the right decision or the wrong decision? So I'd say cash flow is one. I'd say some other difficult ones is always around employees. Letting go of senior executives if they misalign. Again, that's a tough conversation. It's a tough decision because it's not just about doing what's right for the business, but it's also you're managing relationships that have supported, helped build businesses, and they've just moved on, right? So you're trying to do it in an honorable, dismountable way without really impacting on your relationship with those individuals or that person's relationship. So I'd say, that's also challenges that you have. And I'd say another challenge that I learned relatively early on in my entrepreneurial journey was you need to be very careful how you manage clients. I had a scenario where we had one client, and I fundamentally felt that the way in which they were doing things was just really wrong. I was asked by a steering committee above that group to say, could you give us your perspectives on how our team managed you? Before I went and had the conversation with the team, I went to the leadership and had that conversation with them and kind of pulled me into a room. And it was a really awkward environment where people were really upset that I'd gone to their bosses and told, this is our client, gone to my client's boss and told them that the client was bad. And then, who are you? You're just a contractor. So I think that was another lesson, just in terms of stepping over people's heads in business, even if it's the right thing to do, it's probably the wrong thing to do. And it needs to be managed very carefully because it can have a negative impact on your
Right. What happened with that?
Well, ultimately, we lost the contract and we didn't get it back.
There you go.
That was a punishment that we paid for that. But at the same time, it is what it is. And we learned. And the reality is the approach that we took was, look, the value system of that client was not aligned to our value system. And therefore, we didn't actually want them as a client anyway. So it's all good. Let's chase the next opportunity and find the other. And ultimately, we've continued to grow. And that has not been a stepping block or has not been an obstacle in the way of our growth.
Yeah, and congratulations on your massive growth. To have 1,000, just onboarding 1,000 employees, that must have been complete mayhem from an operational standpoint, when you were first growing.
Yeah, look, so people often say, how do you do that? I wrote a book on this called The Oros Effect. But effectively, it's like the key thing that you want to do is if you can be clear on where you want to go as a company, you can be clear on the value systems by which you want to play, and you can be clear on the KPIs for at least your key positions or your key personnel in the organization. Actually, the rest should be relatively straightforward. And once you do that and you just set up basic processes that feed it, the key thing is finding people, onboarding people into your, what I call the OROS, which is, vision, values, beliefs, etc. And if you can filter down the OROS that you have as a leader to all of those employees that you're onboarding as quick as possible and as fast as possible, you can scale your business quite quickly. And then it doesn't really matter. People often find that they just get a disconnect in the business because, certainly what I have experienced is people find a disconnect when the employee base doesn't understand why leadership is doing the things that they're doing. And fundamentally, then they don't agree with it and they try and infiltrate the systems and processes within a company that ends up breaking it all apart. So once people are aligned, you can throw 1,000 people in the mix. We have over 5,000 people now in the organization. And I wouldn't say that every one of them have got, the complete understanding of the vision and values, but certainly a vast majority of them do. And we're continuously infusing that through weekly tech talks, through weekly CEO calls. I give updates on the business, allow people to ask me questions. Why do we do certain things? We have prompted questions too, to try and help some of those questions that we know people are thinking about, but they're not asking.
Right.
And then at least I can answer them in public for the employee.
Okay, that's awesome. So I didn't know that. So you have this very transparent link to the employees that they can ask you questions, and it's not like this hierarchy where nobody can have direct access to you. That's amazing. Now, I didn't know you wrote a book. It's called The Eros Effect?
It's called the Oros effect. OROSS.
Okay, The Eros Effect. Where can we find that book, Jason?
I think it's online in a couple of places, Amazon
Okay.
and various
So
other locations.
if anybody wants to pick that up, the OROSS effect. In fact, we can put a link to that in the show notes.
It's also on ChatGPT as a GPT. If anybody
Okay.
just wants to short circuit for nothing and go and ask questions about the book. But
Amazing. Okay, so I learned something new about you every day because Jason and I are actually colleagues. Okay, so go get the OROS, OROSS effect, because really you had a really monumental climb, because that's incredible what you've achieved, and you're so low key about it as well. Okay, so what's the one thing, I mean, to close the show, what's the one thing that you would like to share with people about success that you feel maybe is your one core value or idea?
So I would say that I'll give two answers here, and one for two different types of audience members. So as a CEO or an owner or an entrepreneur, I would say be clear on what, not necessarily clear, know where you're going and get people on board that support that vision. Don't go to people that are experts, etc., but don't support the vision, because you're never going to have the speed, you're never going to have the support that's required to get you over the line. So that's the one, going back to that marriage sort of story. Find the right partners, and if when they're not the right partner, offload them. The second one, as an employee, I would say, look, the way that the world is going is there's a certain set of skills that I think will become extremely valuable for employees. Those are things like Office 365 and Google Workplace. Now, it sounds really mundane and silly, but to date, I hire a lot of people, and I still see the lack of understanding of these digital collaboration software platforms like 365, Google Workplace. If you can master those skills, you will become an invaluable resource in every company in the world in the near future. And I'm talking like from today to the next 24 months. I'm not talking like in the next 10
because
years.
of AI.
And it's such a skill that's required right now. And the beauty is you can learn for free.
Right.
All these courses are for free online by Google. It'll teach you. And with that, you can become so efficient as an employee, so productive. It'll be extremely difficult for somebody to replace you.
Okay, I completely agree with you. And I actually was shocked. I thought, gee, if people could just know the Google suite, they'd be so helpful to me. When people say I don't know that, I thought, you should learn this. I actually tell my clients to get more proficient, especially with the Google, because I'm all about Gmail suite. Well, thank you.
I have to tell you, I support you there. I'm also a big Google Suite fan. So I've been using it for nearly 10 years now, and
right, much more than the 365, because I have a Mac as well. So, Jason, this has been a pleasure. Now, how can people find the website for your actual company, CG Tech?
So, I mean, it's www.cg-tech.co. So .co.
Oh, good.
And I mean, they can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram if they want to see my dull and boring fun life. But for business-related things, LinkedIn's definitely the way to follow, under Jason English ZA, which stands for South Africa in the old ways. So that's where they can connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much for turning up. And thank you, people, for listening. Please share, please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.
You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jean Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jean Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.